It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster. After 7 months in office, the Chancellor says she does have a plan to kickstart the economy. But will it work?
Low growth is not our destiny. But growth will not come without a fight.
Keir Starmer will have to defend his economic record at PMQs. He'll face Kemi Badenoch at noon. Tony Blair brought in academy schools over 20 years ago. So why is the current Labour government changing them?
It is an attack on excellence. It is an attack on higher standards. It is an attack on aspiration.
Academies are here to stay and will continue to drive up standards. That's what the bill is about.
We'll speak to an academy school leader who says the government lacks a vision for education reform.
Our aim should not be more and more detailed regulation from the centre. It should be to deregulate and to remove the constraints on trade.
And the Prime Minister says he wants to deregulate the economy like Margaret Thatcher. Joining me, Labour MP Helena Dollymore, Conservative peer and Times columnist Danny Finkelstein, Andrew Fisher from the I paper and a former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, and former Conservative advisor Lucy Harris. This is Politics Live. We're going to talk a lot about the government's plan for growth. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has just ended her speech in Oxfordshire. But before we do, let me just show you the front page here of The Times. Because ahead of everything that she has just said, Rachel Reeves, the Prime Minister, in this piece that he penned for The Times, invokes Thatcher in promise to cut red tape. He said in the 1980s, the Thatcher government deregulated finance capital. In the new Labour era, globalisation increased the opportunities for trade. This is our equivalent. For too long, regulation has stopped Britain building its future. My opening question to the panel, starting with Helena, is Keir Starmer right to channel Margaret Thatcher and that period of deregulation?
Well, what the Prime Minister is talking about when he talks about channeling growth is that Margaret Thatcher, whatever you thought of her time in office, is an era-defining politician. I disagreed with many of the things she did, but nobody could doubt, looking back as a historian, that she defined that decade of politics and how the economy was shaped going forward. So what the Prime Minister wants to do with this, and what the Labour government wants to do, is to take down so many of those barriers that we've had to economic growth in this country, to building the infrastructure that we need, whether it be the homes we need, the roads we need, the transport infrastructure we need. And that's what the speech by the Chancellor today is about, making sure that we are backing the builders, not the blockers, and getting the growth that our communities so desperately need. Because we talk about economic growth, but what that actually means for people is more money in their pockets, more jobs,
we're going to talk about
and more money
substance.
for public services.
I'm just interested in this comparison with Margaret Thatcher, and you're totally comfortable with that and that period of deregulation.
I think what the Prime Minister is talking about here is how you define an era. Being a politician that doesn't just stick with the status quo but challenges the status quo and challenging those blockers in our economy that have held this country back for so long from reaching our potential.
Is it a fair comparison with Margaret Thatcher?
Well, not entirely, but it's very interesting. And I don't think it's because she's an era-defining politician, although that is clearly, obviously, you're right, it's one aspect of it. It's because he thinks she was basically right about quite a lot of things, which I do too. Whether a Labour government could do some of those things or would want to do some of those things is a different matter. Because clearly, at the same time as talking about regulation, the government's also, introduced an employment rights bill which contains a lot of new regulation, and that is a natural thing for a Labour government to do. So it cannot cite Margaret Thatcher as simply an era-defining politician without looking at what the content of the era she was defining was. And I think it's lots of what Rachel Reeves has said, and Keir Starmer as well, and this is the reason why the Times led on it in our front page, is a very striking acceptance that a lot of what people on the right, like myself, have been saying for a long time, which is we're over-regulating the economy, we're putting too much burden on business. If you did less, you would grow more. That they're acknowledging that that's correct. That's quite, that talk about era-defining, that's actually pretty important statement.
Right, but how can you deregulate and regulate at the same time? The Employment Rights Bill is a classic example of regulation. That may be right, but you can't be era-defining in both.
I think it's about creating the conditions for businesses to thrive and for the economy to thrive. I spent a lot of time working at one of Britain's biggest businesses before coming into politics, and actually that was a business where they encouraged flexible working, where they gave more rights beyond the legal minimums to their employees, because like many businesses, they recognised that employment freedoms, that giving workers security is actually going to increase productivity in your workforce.
But it is more regulation.
The best employees are happy employees, and so that's what the Employment Rights Bill is about, giving vital protections.
What did you think when you saw that piece, Andrew Fisher, and the Prime Minister invoking Margaret Thatcher from the 1980s? Is that what Labour Party voters want to hear and see?
Probably not. And I think, really, as well, Keir Starmer should go and speak to Gordon Brown, who continued her deregulation of the city and said afterwards, you've got to stop taking one industry's view and look at what's in the whole interest. I was wrong. You know, post-crash, when the banking sector collapsed, which was post the Thatcher deregulation of the city and Brown's continuation of it. And actually, I think we need to learn the lessons of that. I mean, just historically as well, if we're going to talk about this, the 1980s had lower growth than the decade before. So it wasn't like she unleashed this great, huge amount of growth. The 80s grew slower than the 70s did. There was higher unemployment. There was more poverty, more inequality. That's not something we want to replicate. And when we talk about regulation, look, regulation's really good. You know, better regulation would have stopped Grenfell from happening. Better regulation would stop all the pollution and sewage we have in our seas and rivers. Actually, we're deregulating the trade unions. I mean, I would take a different approach to what you say about workers' rights. The Tory governments of David Cameron and later Boris Johnson put more regulation on trade unions, made them the most restrictive in the Western world, and this is deregulating it, still not putting it back onto anything like the freedoms that trade unions and workers have in France, in Germany, in other places. It's actually pretty modest what that Employment Rights Bill is doing, but welcome.
Do you welcome the comparison with Margaret Thatcher?
No, absolutely not. I mean, liberalising planning would be the way to go, but I don't think it's as radical as it needs to be. If you look at some of the measures that they've been talking about, environmental regulations and their reviews and judicial reviews, that doesn't go far enough. They're turning judicial reviews, which is one of the biggest blockers to large infrastructure projects, to rather than a paper consultation, to a verbal consultation. But there's still a judicial review, which I would probably say challenges democracy, because it shouldn't be allowed to be the ultimate word and judges shouldn't be allowed to do that. So I don't think that's very radical. On environmental regulations, they're still allowing developers to basically pay their way out of environmental regulations. And I am quite surprised that we haven't seen more of a backlash from environmental groups and lobbyists.
All right, well,
Come back on the judicial review point, because judges don't make the law, they interpret the law. And if people's rights are being abused, then judges have a right to look at competing bits of legislation and say, actually, your rights are being abused by this. And it's an absolute fundamental right for us to be able to go to the courts against a government that might be oppressing us or kind of infringing our rights in some way and say, actually, look, I've got the right to this protection. And I think that's important. We shouldn't say this is all about judges, because it's not.
We'll come back.
The law is made by politicians.
We're going to come back to all of this in just a moment, but let's have a little listen to something Rachel Reeves has said in her speech.
For too long, we have accepted low expectations and accepted decline. We no longer have to do that. We can do so much better. Low growth is not our destiny. But growth will not come without a fight, without a government willing to take the right decisions now to change our country's future for the better. So I can confirm today that this government supports a third runway at Heathrow and is inviting proposals to be brought forward by the summer.
Well, Rachel Reeves confirming there in that bit that we have just played about her approving a further application for a third runway at Heathrow was something that had certainly been billed and speculated about. Well, it's been confirmed now. Well, let's talk to the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason, because you were there watching the speech. The room has just emptied, I see, after the questions asked. But how big a moment was this for the Chancellor?
Yeah, hello to you, Joe. It was a big moment, this. You know, Rachel Reeves's natural sort of tone and demeanour in public is not to bounce around the stage, but this was effectively her doing that in terms of the shift of emphasis and tone and language from where the government was just a matter of months ago, and all of the criticism they got, and frankly, privately, some ministers accept that they were too negative in their framing and language early on, and now it's rather different. There was lots of emphasis around growth and development and dynamism and energy and enterprise, that talk of deregulation that you were just discussing. The centrepiece, that announcement that you just played there, that idea of a third runway at Heathrow, my goodness, have we not been here before? Yes, we have. I've just been chatting to the chief exec, actually, of the airport and put that exact point to him. And he reckoned, I guess he has to, doesn't he, that this time might just be different because this is a government with a massive majority that will see out at least a term. And by that point, so he hopes, the whole idea is far enough down the track that it becomes unstoppable. And there's an element of that, I think, in the various other announcements we got, Joe, peppered as they were geographically around the map of the UK, that this time this government is willing, they say, to pick those fights and have those arguments with those in the past who might have stood in the way of all sorts of developments for all sorts of reasons. In other words, those arguments are coming, but the government wants to crack on with them.
Will this all turn around the government's fortunes?
Now there's a question. I mean, I suppose it will be if it's seen to work. What I'm struck by, and I attempted to ask the Chancellor in the press conference, is that a lot of these issues have been around for a while, haven't they? You think of the legacy of the financial crisis and the pandemic, for instance, and conflict abroad, and kind of a sclerotic economic growth for a long time, and that sort of sense of, is this enough? Will it be enough for people to sense over the next couple of years that life's getting a bit better, that they can feel a bit more optimistic about the future? That's what really matters, isn't it, ultimately to millions of people, and therefore will likely be the biggest determinant of whether or not people come to a conclusion that this government has succeeded or the alternative. When I speak to folk in government, Joe, they talk about wanting visible senses of stuff getting better. Visible proof points is the very wonky phrase that gets used. In other words, kind of cranes in the sky and shovels in the ground. Now, these things take a bit of time, don't they? Because there are planning processes, etc., etc. Yes. Even if there are attempts to shortcut things that in the past have got bogged down. I think in the end that's going to be the measure of their success or not.
Chris Mason, thank you very much. Let's talk about the timing, because the government said it had a plan for growth when it came into office last July. We're 7 months on and we're talking about a third runway at Heathrow that's going to take years. We're talking about the Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor boosting the economy by 78 billion by 2035. There's going to be no tangible difference, is there, Helena, to people's lives and living standards this year or next?
I don't accept that. I think the decisions that this Labour government have taken in the 6 months since taking office have been embarking on a really fast transformation of our economy to get our economy on the right footing.
£25 billion worth of taxes on business.
The budget announced how we would fill the £22 billion black hole left by the Conservatives, which they left behind, overspends in every department. It was so important to get the confidence from businesses that we created a stable footing for the economy that they could invest in. And what the budget did was put lots of investment into our public services, because businesses, like all of us, rely on public services and have been suffering the impacts of broken public services, of potholes in our roads, of hospitals and waiting lists that their employees are stuck on, of schools that don't deliver the right education for children. So actually what this government is doing is putting our public services back on that right footing, and while also taking the decisions to cut down the barriers to infrastructure and economic growth. And we were talking just now about economic growth and regulation. Yesterday we passed the Water Special Measures Bill, which gets tough on the water companies. And in my constituency, Southern Water's impact has held our economic growth back so much. It's hurt tourism.
But I'm talking about whether people will notice a tangible difference in time. I mean, Danny, it may not matter because they've got a very big majority. It's a long time until the next election. Does it matter for now? Can they wait for that growth to come in the way they hope from the measures that we've just heard from Helen?
Yes, they can wait. So Chris, I thought, was correct in his estimation of the political impact of this. It will depend on whether it works or not. And, I thought Andrew made interesting points before, because he was questioning whether this deregulatory approach would work. And obviously, as you would expect, I'm more enthusiastic about it than he is, which is ironic, but nevertheless important. So we'll see how consistent they are in doing this. I mean, I think that was a good attempt to defend what's been done and obviously contain a lot of truth in it. But obviously today was a recognition that the government feels it didn't get the message right in the first 7 months, and it needs to have a new, more dynamic message in order to be successful, which I think was a correct judgment. And, you know, I'm just impressed by how they've now gone down this deregulatory, you know, Thatcher rhetoric. I'm surprised that they've only sort of stuck on it now when they want a big majority using slightly different language. So we'll see whether it works. But the only thing that will matter is not all the discussion we have, however important that is and intellectually interesting it is. What matters is whether or not it produces increased economic satisfaction for people and whether it does it in time for the next general election. So they need to be in a position whereby they're going in the right direction, but they haven't reached their destination. That's the optimal position. So
right. Well, before
I
come to you two, let's have a listen to the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, because he told the BBC this morning people will feel better off this year.
When will people notice a difference from the plans that you are going to announce today?
Well, look, I think they will feel a difference this year because of the revisions to growth that we have seen. But also what the decisions you will see today will mean is that we will generate that sense of excitement, momentum, dynamism. People will be clear that if you aren't investing in the UK, you stand to miss out. Big infrastructure projects do take time to deliver, but the sense of things happening in the UK, of determination to deliver for the British people, that can be generated by what you will hear today.
Helena, briefly, and then we'll
Yeah, absolutely. I think Danny's absolutely right that voters need to feel the impact of this. There's some polling out today from the Good Growth Foundation that shows the lessons from America are that abstract growth that doesn't filter down to voters' pockets does not work, and that's why the government is focused on making sure it delivers for people and public services. People really feel the impact of whether they can get a GP appointment.
Growth, as you say, it's a sort of image. What does growth really mean?
It looks like jobs. It looks like opportunities in your area. It looks like cutting NHS waiting lists, being able to get a GP appointment, being able to send your child to a good quality local school.
Will living standards meaningfully improve this year?
That is absolutely the aim of this government.
I mean, this is the Institute. Let's have a look at this tweet. This was after the budget. Institute for Fiscal Studies. The last Parliament, the last Conservative Parliament, government under the last Parliament, including a pandemic and a cost of living crisis, saw per capita disposable household income rise by just 0.3% per year. I think it was, in fact, the lowest sort of disposable income standard for a government. But the forecast for the current Parliament suggests it will be the second worst on record for household incomes. I mean, that doesn't bode well.
Well, the budget increased the national living wage for the first time. That is more money in the pockets of the people on the lowest incomes, a really much-needed improvement. But we have said we are determined to do what it takes to get the growth that filters down to people's pockets.
We're all going to see, so we can wait a few minutes to find out. So, you know, the question is, for now, is whether this is the right approach. And so the argument that Andrew put about, you know, questioning whether it was the right approach, I think is the area where we all need to be. And I do think, in the end, that if you remove burdens from businesses, as well as improving public services, because they're an important part of the equation as well, my view is you need to do the business stuff first in order to be able to finance
before the public sector, right?
Yeah, you will eventually get an improvement in life satisfaction. But I understand why Andrew doesn't share that view.
Andrew?
Well, I'll speak for myself, but I mean, look,
I didn't mean to do that.
It's good for you to summarise my whole view. I think just going back to what Rachel Reeves has announced today, I think a lot of it is very long-term stuff that clearly isn't going to have an impact in the next few years because the planning process.
But is it worthwhile? Is it worthwhile expanding Heathrow?
No, it's not actually. I mean, Heathrow is a complete white elephant. It's environmentally bad, it's economically bad, and it's socially bad. In terms of the 4,000 homes that will be demolished to build it and the 10,000 people that will be evicted from their communities, it's very bad. In the environment, nobody is saying we can meet our environmental, legally binding climate change targets whilst expanding aviation. And on the economic case for it, 3 people leave through Heathrow for every 1 that comes in. So expanding its capacity is only going to accelerate that. We have a 40 billion travel deficit as a whole as a country. That's just going to it's not going to generate more growth in the UK other than building it. There are better things that we could be building which would actually create more jobs and make savings to the public sector. For instance, a mass programme of building council housing, which would create construction jobs. You'd have to align that with a skills strategy. You would also bring down the housing benefit bill, which is huge because we are paying tens of billions of pounds in the pockets of private landlords who are overcharging and charge more than council housing, where the money is retained within the housing and the public sector.
Do you get any sense that the Labour government's going to do any of these things?
No, I'm afraid not, and that worries me. Home insulation is another area which would save money on people's bills and create a lot of jobs because it's very labour intensive, and would save money on their bills. Therefore, they'd be able to spend more money in the real economy that generates growth.
All those things the Labour government is doing.
No, you've downgraded your home insulation programme, I'm afraid, massively.
Can I just say, I don't think this is a viable long-term economic plan. This is cherry-picking from the Labour Party.
You were part of the Growth Commission under Liz Truss. Surely you welcome all these
Well, I think
proposals.
a long-term economic outlook is exactly what we should be looking at. What we should be looking at is, rather than cherry-picking a few ideas that we like, i.e. liberalising the planning system, it also comes along with a raft of taxes, such as taxes on farmers and families, taxes on jobs, increasing NICs, which means that businesses no longer can employ the people they want to employ, and the employment market is now more restricted. You know, these measures are just a higgledy-piggledy of different ideas, and a lot of them are the ones that could work are conservative ideas. The pensions, liberalising the pensions to access surplus cash in that was a conservative idea. Many of the deregulatory ideas, many of deregulating ideas are conservative ideas. The Labour Party have run out of ideas, and now they're coming over to the Conservative side and stealing all of theirs.
I think after 14 years,
it's quite funny.
The Conservatives ran out of ideas, and the only ideas they did have
had 14 years to
under
think
Liz
of an
Truss
idea,
crashed the
and all you
economy
can think of is
and
our
sent mortgages
ideas.
spiralling and left this 22 billion black hole we're now working to fill.
I'm not sure on a day when the leader of the Labour Party says that he wants to be like Margaret Thatcher is the day to say the Conservative Party ran out of ideas. It's certainly true, which I think was sort of apparent. The Conservative Party ran out of seriousness and the ability to implement its ideas, but that's somewhat different. What's really interesting about this is the contrast that sort of divides our an approach that I broadly kind of share, if you could implement it consistently, which I do question, with the approach that you outlined. That's where the dividing line is, which is, I apologise, by the way, earlier if I was trying to characterise it incorrectly, but I was just trying to capture how important that debate is, really.
Right. I mean, in terms of what the government is looking at, though, Lucy, people will say, look, the plans for growth under Liz Truss backfired spectacularly. £45 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts didn't go well, and you didn't get growth. Why should anyone listen to what previous Conservative governments, although obviously not Margaret Thatcher's in this case, listened to what you had to say when it comes to getting growth?
This is not about who we should be listening to. It's about looking at the numbers and thinking, where are they going? We should be looking at a long-term economic plan. It's not right for the Labour Party to run out of ideas, go to the Conservatives, cherry-pick ideas they like, and then make sure that they've had this situation where...
But if they work, what's wrong with that?
Oh, that's fine, but there has to be a raft of ideas, and the IFS has already said that you need more than just a few ideas to create long-term economic growth.
The IFS has also uprated its predictions for the UK to be the fastest major economy in Europe growing.
Also, if you play your
that's a pretty serious
indication
that they are confident in this Labour government's plan to grow the economy. We made very clear in our manifesto that growth was our #1 mission, and we were determined to do what it takes and reform the planning system in the way needed to build the infrastructure and the homes that this country needs. And what I would say to the points that Andrew was making before is that we have set out an extremely ambitious agenda to build the biggest expansion of affordable homes in a generation. We've just passed the Renters Reform Act to ban no-fault evictions, which is going to have a huge impact in curtailing the number of families waiting for temporary accommodation, which has cost councils so much. These are serious reforms in just the first 6 months of a Labour government.
OK, what will you do, though, about opposition? I mean, Andrew set out his opposition to expansion of Heathrow and probably other airports, but the Mayor of London, Labour's Sadiq Khan, a long-term opponent, has just reacted to what he's heard from Rachel Reeves, and he says he will challenge the expansion however he can, even if it's through the courts. That is going to be the problem. It's still going to be held up yet again, and this is from Labour's Mayor of London.
Well, the Chancellor has been really clear that the Heathrow expansion, just like any other proposition that comes forward, would go through a legal process. It's absolutely right, as part of that legal process, that our legally binding environment commitments and climate change commitments will be looked at, and it will only go ahead if it meets those commitments. But we are absolutely confident that we can do both. We can deliver economic growth and go ahead with the expansion of Heathrow while meeting those climate change commitments. And I would just say there is a lot of focus on Heathrow. in my constituency in Hastings and Rye, the expansion of Gatwick is also a huge opportunity. It would create about 800 jobs in my constituency. It would massively improve transport infrastructure.
Let me get the others to respond.
We've got to stop this obsession with Heathrow as well. It's about other regional airports.
Well, I think the government's probably put it front and centre.
Fail on this. Let's just be clear. You can't make that, as she clearly has, one of the big planks of the growth programme and then fail to implement it. That now Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have to succeed in delivering. They've got a very large majority. They've got a sort of domination also of local government as well. They've got to succeed now in delivering this. Failure is not an option, and they cannot let, Sadiq Khan obviously has got his own mandate and his own responsibilities. Keir Starmer has got to make sure he's picked a political battle he cannot lose.
Right, I mean, a political battle. Why is Labour's Mayor of London picking a battle with the Labour government?
He's not picking a battle. His position on this has been consistent. It's Keir Starmer's position that's changed. He voted against Heathrow expansion the last time it came up, and his position's changed. Sadiq Khan, to his credit, has got a mandate for it. He was elected on that basis. The Labour manifesto said nothing about Heathrow, by the way, in 2024. And Sadiq Khan has made huge improvements in London's air quality, and he doesn't want to see that jeopardised by building a very polluting extra runway at Heathrow, which will ruin all the gains we've had from ULEZ. Which
we have seen a lot of changes in the technology available here. There is sustainable aviation fuel, which means you can fly in a much greener way. The government's just announced extra investment in that. So actually there are more ways of doing this than there previously were, and it's right in light of that we reconsider.
Oh, absolutely reconsider.
Why have Heathrow at all, though, Andrew? I mean, in those circumstances, right? So yes. So if all the arguments you make against having a third runway also apply to a second runway.
Well, they don't, because the second runway doesn't destroy 10,000 people's homes.
But is it about the environment or is it about homes?
And it doesn't make air quality worse. It keeps it where it is. So I'm not for closing down airports. So please don't try and characterise.
No, I'm not trying to characterise. I didn't.
No, but he's asking a question.
Sorry, just to be clear, I didn't mischaracterise you at all.
I
literally asked you a question. All right. So I didn't mischaracterise you at all. I want to understand why you think that aviation is all right itself, but not more aviation. So at what point should we stop having aviation? In other words, what are you saying to people about flying? So that's what, and it's a genuine question, which I want to understand.
I think we overall need to reduce demand, and I think we can through technology. For instance, I know as somebody who used to work for a trade union, we used to fly to have meetings with our people up in Scotland. We now do Zoom meetings because that technology is there. That's saved. And actually, if you look at business travel overall, it's pretty much been stable the last 10 years. It hasn't gone up. So there are ways of reducing demand to do that. I don't think you need to expand that. But it's like, say, if you said energy, we all take for granted now we want to reduce our energy use, right? And we all do it. We all turn our lights off more, we take the TV off standby, or whatever it happens to be, and we do that. So we can reduce it. Nobody's saying get rid of energy, don't have electricity to people's homes. Nobody's saying that. Maybe a few people are, but...
But businesses are clear that Heathrow is at capacity, and unlocking that would create more growth and more opportunities.
I mean, there are two arguments there. I think...
Let me just get a word from Lucy before we move on. Are you in favour of this expansion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those opportunities that in a world which is rapidly changing in terms of trade, we're going to need extra capacity. With Donald Trump looking at tariffs, with the Labour Party wanting to be more friends with the European Union, I can see that there would be a capacity issue, and certainly I think it would be one of those things that would boost the economy long term.
I just think Andrew's basically saying that the capacity we have is mysteriously the optimal capacity, and I don't understand why that would be. So that's what I mean when I said why would you have any capacity at all? So my view is that there's a very good well, I think that is the same argument, I think there's a very good argument for expanding.
Dan, it's like saying if you want to reduce energy, you want to get rid of all energy out of people's homes. That's not what I'm saying, clearly.
All right, I'm going to stop this just for the moment to say, if you're busy making lunch, although it's a little bit early when this show is on air, and can't watch on your TV, you can now get Politics Live on your smart speaker. Just ask BBC Sounds to play Politics Live. Of course, we have PMQs coming up in just over 15 minutes' time. Let's talk about schools and the Schools and Wellbeing Bill. In the Times, the headline, Bill will leave children spending longer in failing schools. schools. The Children's Commissioner attacks Labour's education reform and says it would jeopardise decades of improving school standards. Now, Academy head teachers and chief executives, some of them have also raised concerns over the proposed reforms. We can speak to Muhsin Ojar, who is the chief executive of the Anthem Schools Trust, which has schools across the East Midlands, London and the Thames Valley. Welcome to you, Muhsin. Do you agree with the comments from the Children's Commissioner that the bill will reduce the freedoms that this academy schools have currently?
Thank you. I think I understand the schools commissioner's comments because those concerns stem from the lack of clarity around the dispositions and stipulations in the schools bill. So we have been operating in a system where, in cases where schools were failing, there was clarity around the regulation and the processes that had to be followed, and in the most successful cases, because of that clarity of accountability and regulation, improvement for those communities that needed the most happened very quickly. Now, I'm not saying that it was always the case, but in majority of cases where for example, academy orders were issued and appropriate sponsors were found, improvements were happening very quickly, and we have great examples up and down the country. I think the main concern, from my perspective, certainly, about the bill is I don't disagree with the spirit of the bill. I think 100% of colleagues in the sector are supportive of the idea that we must remove barriers to children's success. And some dispositions in the law I fully support.
Right. So what are your specific concerns? What freedoms do you want to protect that you currently have in academy schools?
Yeah. So you know the issues. The issues aren't the content specifically of the policy. My issue is the fact that the law lacks vision, and the bill fails to articulate a clear vision for education, for what it is that we have to be achieving for the next 10, 15 or 20 years. I don't think it's helpful that the government claimed to say that they're agnostic about structure. I don't believe that's helpful because there are great examples for both academies and local authority schools. And I would have preferred, rather than say that they're agnostic about structures, to say that they recognise the great work that's happening across all schools, be it academies or schools.
All right. Well, let me bring in Labour MP Helena Dollymore. I mean, what about Muhsin's claim that it lacks vision? There's not clarity in this bill about what it is you're trying to do with education.
I don't accept that. I think the basis of this bill is to say that what matters the most here is the outcomes for children. And I speak as the MP for a constituency where we are in the bottom 1% of outcomes for children. Half of young people in Hastings and Rye leave school without the basic qualifications in English and maths.
And what do you think that's down to?
That has been, in Hastings, we have been seriously failed by some particularly bad academy chains. One that's just been closed down and another one where 123 children left a school last term in my constituency. So what I would say on that is there have been some examples of where academy schools have done really well in other places, but there have also been some examples of where it's gone wrong. So what the bill does is try to put out a stable footing, whether you are a local authority or you're an academy school. You must meet the same standards. You must be focused on outcomes for children. And there's also some really important measures in the bill that haven't been spoken about enough. Vital safeguarding protections for children who are homeschooled, who are at risk of falling through the cracks, like Sarah Sharif.
Yes, and I understand that, and we have discussed that at length. But I'm more interested in what the issues are that you are trying to fix here, because the Children's Commissioner has said that you're legislating against the things we know work in schools, and we risk children spending longer in failing schools by slowing down the pace of school improvement. Why are you taking away the duty and obligation of a failing school, perhaps like some in your constituency, to immediately be taken over by an academy chain that's doing better?
Because in Hastings, they took them over because they were failing and they haven't turned them around. So actually what I've encountered on the ground as an MP is that there hasn't been that accountability with the academies that have been failing to answer for the failure to turn around outcomes for children. So what the bill does is it says, whatever kind of school you are, whatever kind of structure you follow, you've got to meet basic standards, you've got to be focused on outcomes for children, and that's what the bill does, and I make no apologies for that, because Danny, there have been good examples, there have been bad examples. Uniformity is important, because otherwise you get places like Hastings where children
fair, then, of
failed.
Kemi Badenoch to call this a sort of vandalism of schools?
I'm afraid I think it is. Obviously, views will differ, and I listen to respect. You've got experience in your own constituency that we ought to listen to. But my challenge back would be the approach that Keir Starmer has clearly been converted to on growth, which is risk and choice and deregulation, applies just as well in education as it does to economic growth once you've established this as a political idea that you support. And truth, there will be a variation in quality. You just need to be able to ensure that you can move quickly enough when schools fail. Sometimes you will get evidence that, something that you put in place doesn't then work a second time. That's not evidence that the whole approach doesn't work, because on average it works. And that has been the conclusion not just of Conservative governments but of Labour before it. Lots of this was put in place by a Labour government, I think correctly, and the Conservative Party intensified that approach, and I think it's a great shame that Bridget Phillipson's decided she doesn't want to persist with it, particularly when her position, which is a more regulatory one, is so at variance with what Rachel Reeves has just established, leaving it very difficult to understand what the government is trying to do across the piece.
Musa, do you agree with that?
I think it's just to go back to the points that were made previously, and I agree that there are some areas in the bill that I support. The safeguarding is one of them, and the other one is the oversight of trust and trust executives. Those are very sensible, and as I said, the majority of colleagues will support those. But I have not read or seen anywhere that one of the reasons why we need to fix education is because of academy freedoms. And from my perspective, and I think this is shared across the board, the challenges that we face, and this has been happening for years now, this is not just recent, are linked to us getting a clear understanding and steer around financial sustainability of the system in a context where we have falling student numbers.
Right. Well, let me just put that. I mean, what is the evidence, Helena, that academies having too much freedom or too many freedoms is negatively impacting school standards?
I think if you are a good, well-performing academy chain, there is nothing to worry about in this legislation.
No, but what's the answer to my question? What's the evidence that the freedoms that they have had, perhaps to do things like vary the curriculum or pay teachers a little bit more because there's a problem with retention and recruitment, so you can get your head of science. What's the evidence that that has negatively impacted school standards?
Well, for example, on teachers' pay, what the bill does is set a floor, not a ceiling, because there have been some examples of academy chains not paying teachers what they should be paying them. So it's really important we get that level playing field. But I would say the examples are the examples of where academy schools have failed. The difference with an academy school is that you are
trying to get to.
You are taking government money which should be spent on children's education, and you've got a responsibility to spend it well and to have the outcomes that those children need.
Lucy?
I think it all depends on the freedom of aspect of freedom is how much it aligns with the national curriculum. And that's the aspect I think is most important here, because we do have religious schools who are academies, and that's very curious for me to understand how Labour intends to justify that against, say, Islamic schools or Catholic schools or schools that have a different national curriculum, and how will that align? And I also think that if there is a step to control national curriculum within these free schools, that to me is slightly insidious, because it almost takes independent thought and says, no, the state is now going to tell you what you can and cannot teach in your free schools.
Andrew?
State-funded institutions, we shouldn't forget that. They're getting funding from the state. I don't think it's unreasonable for the state to say, and you must follow these certain regulations.
So this is about taking freedoms away from academies?
It's about finding a balance. And actually, I think what the last Labour government did is look and inherited deeply underfunded schools and massively increased schools funding, which, after a brief and sustained dip, actually, under the last Conservative government, is now roughly back up to where it was in 2010. So actually, we've got increased funding, we've got smaller class sizes, we've got better teaching standards than any parent, and I'm a parent of 2 children, one in a local authority school, one in an academy. and both are rated good by Ofsted, by the way. But there are 800 academies in England that are rated inadequate. Some of them are Anthem academies, by the way. And, you know, there is a problem. And some of those academies are rated bad because they have derogated from the curriculum and got rid of computer science because it's too expensive to buy that in. And actually on teachers' pay, can I just say, teachers' pay is £1,000 less a year on average in academies compared to maintained schools. So this idea...
There will be a variation in quality under a system...
Of course, in any system.
But under any system, but also particularly one which is based on a form of choice and deregulation. And that is, you know, so the government now appears to be arguing deregulation doesn't work because it...
No, it's not arguing that.
Regulation
it's trying to
doesn't...
put some balance into the system. So it's keeping a lot of the freedoms.
So you're backing this bill?
It's not rolled back. I think it's broadly a good bill, actually,
right.
on whole. I think there's some really other good stuff in there about profit caps on children's homes because they've been a complete rip-off and run by complete shysters in some cases. So it's really good, some of the stuff in there. The cap on uniform costs, where actually a lot of academies have been upping the charge of that to rip off parents. And actually, look, a school uniform should be about making your child...
The problem has been the lack of accountability, because as we have all said, they are funded by the government. Public money funds children's education, and so it's important that they are held to account on the outcomes they are meeting. Yeah. And there have been examples of failures. You know, all 3 in my constituency are rated inadequate in Hastings, the secondary schools. That's not good enough. No. And there hasn't been a mechanism to change that.
Right, but
one academy chain was taking 20% of the government grant.
What about Danny's question about the vision for public sector reform broadly? Because we talked about deregulating, and certainly when it comes to health, Keir Starmer backs West Streeting, the Health Secretary, in wanting more private provision, looking rightwards, if you like, on public sector reform there. And on schools, you're doing something quite different. You're wanting to take away, according to the Children's Commissioner, and Moussa broadly...
I don't accept that. I think...
is linked to an academy. I mean, she's not neutral in this, is she, the Children's
Commissioner?
No, but I'm just saying, but my question is more broadly about which direction is which direction.
Not really.
I think there's actually the common thread that runs through all of those policy agendas is a focus on outcomes, not structures or processes. In this case of schools, it's about making sure we get the same outcomes for children regardless of the structure. In the case of the NHS and waiting lists, we have said we're willing to do whatever it takes to cut waiting lists and get people the treatment they need. However we need to clear the backlogs, we will do it. So actually, I think we're talking about the same thing. It's about getting, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, delivering change for voters in our constituencies that they can meaningfully see, whether that be an appointment at the GP or a school that works for their children.
Is it wise then for Kemi Badenoch to pursue this? You've heard the arguments being made here by Helena and Andrew Fisher. Is it because, as critics have said, that the Conservatives are clinging on to the only bit of their legacy they think they've had some success on?
Well,
and that was...
I believe they've had a lot of success in lots of education policy, and they're going with a consensus which I think has improved education over a long period, and they're defending it. So I think that seems like a perfectly reasonable thing. And obviously, this is a punt. You know, that these will do good things for a number of failing schools and won't affect the performance on average. Whereas I think Kemi Badenoch's argument, and mine too, will be I don't think that will be what happens. I think it'll damage the average.
I doubt you will.
Moussa, should we just get a final comment from you before we go?
Thank you. I think, as I said, no one disagrees with the fact that we want to achieve the best outcomes for students. But from the sector's perspective, the pressing issues that the bill fails to address are assurances around school funding, challenges presented by staff recruitment and retention, and some answers, some urgent answers around SEND funding. And in most cases where schools don't or academies don't deliver the great services that the communities deserve, it's always linked to that.
All right, Moussa and Ojal, thank you very much for joining us. Just before we go into the chamber for Prime Minister's questions, we've talked a lot, or there's been quite a lot of speculation as to whether Lord Peter Mandelson, his appointment to be our man in Washington by Keir Starmer, would be accepted by the incoming Trump administration, particularly because of disobliging things he said in the past, although that's a crowded field. Let's have a look at this headline. Fox News, it's an interview Peter Mandelson has done with them. Incoming UK ambassador walks back comments on danger of Trump, ill-judged and wrong. Lord Mandelson says Trump could be one of the most consequential American presidents of his lifetime. Do you welcome that walking back?
I don't welcome much about Peter Mandelson or Donald Trump, to be frank with you. But, you know, let's see.
wise to do?
I think he's the ambassador, so he has to do that. But I personally don't think he was wrong originally about the danger of Donald Trump. I'm more alarmed by him now than I was even before he got elected, and I was quite alarmed by that.
Right. Does it show a mature politician, Lucy, someone who's able to change their mind, review the situation?
I mean, he doesn't have much of a choice. I mean, he's got to do a lot of backpedalling, hasn't he? The whole Labour Party have to do a lot of backpedalling now that Donald Trump's in charge. We need a lot of strong negotiation with the US, with our trade deals, and they have no choice. So they do have to swallow a bit here.
Lots of people do. I mean, J.D. Vance had to do that too, so be fair. So Peter Mantelson's not the only person that's doing that. But
David
the question
Lammy.
is whether he's... The question,
Yeah.
the question, though, you know, the question is whether this is going to be the right approach. I think there's a real challenge to Britain's long-term independence and security posed by having an American president who doesn't really believe in NATO. I think, you know, over time we'll have to revisit all the questions that raises.
Yeah, but how do you approach it then? I mean, if you are either the ambassador or the foreign secretary.
I mean, unfortunately, I think Donald Trump is a narcissist, and it's completely impossible to deal with him on any other basis than this.
It's time for PMQs.
Communities across the United Kingdom have been hit hard by Storm Eowyn. I spoke with the leaders of the devolved administrations in Scotland and Northern Ireland over the weekend to work with them on support that's required and to pay tribute to all those responding on the front line. Mr. Speaker, kick-starting economic growth is the #1 mission of this government. Put more money in people's pockets and deliver on our plan for change. Today, the Chancellor announced our next steps to deliver the plan for change. A new Oxford-Cambridge corridor, redeveloping Old Trafford and supporting new runway at Heathrow. We're removing the barriers to investment, supporting innovation and going further and faster to boost growth. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Speaker, this April the state pension will increase by £470 and over the course of this Parliament by up to £1,900, benefiting millions of pensioners. Does the Prime Minister agree that means testing the state pension would do severe harm? And will he confirm that this government will always protect the state pension and the triple lock?
Let me be absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker. There will be no means testings of the state pension under this Labour government. We're committed both to the triple lock and to the principle that people should receive pension based on their contribution, regardless of their wealth. And he's right to say 12 million pensioners receiving £470 increase in April. And when people like the Leader of the Opposition say they want means testing, that means a cut. The difference is they'd cut pensions, we're increasing them.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Benlock.
Mr. Speaker, may I take this opportunity to solemnly commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And we remember the 6 million Jewish men, women and children who were murdered. The Holocaust stands as a unique evil in human history. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister set his growth test. He said, if a policy is good for growth, the answer is yes. If it's not, the answer is no. This morning, the Chancellor embraced a series of Conservative policies. Although many are welcomed, they will take years to deliver. Mr. Speaker, when Conservatives left office, we had the fastest economic growth in the G7. But what is the government doing for growth now? It's destroying it. Let's look at the employment bill. The government's own figures say it will cost business £5 billion a year. It clearly fails the Prime Minister's growth test. Will he drop it?
Mr. Speaker, I think the proposition they left a golden inheritance was tested on the 4th of July, which is why they're standing there. But she asked what we're doing. The ONS say we've got the highest investment for 19 years. PwC, second best place to invest in the world. IMF upgrading growth, predicted fastest growing major economy in Europe. Wages up, inflation down. Mr. Speaker, there's more to do. We're reforming planning and regulation. building the new homes that we need, supporting a third runway at Heathrow. And as she admitted to the CBI in November, there's no point me just complaining about Labour, she said. It's obvious that we Conservatives lost the confidence of business. We're not taking lectures from them.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't want to talk about the employment bill because he doesn't know about it. Last week, he misled the House. He was not on top of his own education bill, listening to
Sorry. We can't accuse the Prime Minister of misleading the House. No. But he can't do it. I'm sure there's words that you would prefer to use.
Mr. Speaker, last week he claimed to have laid down an amendment that he had not made. He doesn't know what is going on in here or out there. Last week, I spoke to a woman running a business in Exeter. She is terrified of taking on new staff. She is struggling to keep her head above water, dreading what this government will do next. She's not alone. The Federation of Small Businesses says 92% of small employers are concerned about the employment bill. Clauses 1 through 6 make it harder for business to hire new employees, often young people looking for their first job. This isn't an employment bill, it's an unemployment bill. Given these clauses, will he drop his bill and show that he is not anti-growth?
Mr. Speaker, we believe in giving people proper dignity and protection at work. That's why we're proud of our record supporting workers. They consistently vote against any protection for working people. And her consistent refrain is that there should be less. But, Mr. Speaker, we are driving growth on behalf of working people. Good work rights are consistent with growth, and every good business knows that. And on top of the planning reform, the building of houses, supporting aviation, the Chancellor this morning spoke of the Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor, redeveloping Old Trafford, and manufacturing at East Midlands Airport. We want to grow the economy. The only policy she's got is to shrink pensions.
Mr. Speaker, all his ideas are the ones that we thought of. He needs to make sure that we deliver for growth now as well as the future. To grow our economy, we must get more people off sickness and welfare and into work. Clauses 8 and 9 of the unemployment bill take us in the opposite direction by increasing entitlements. His government itself estimates that these changes will increase business costs from £600 million to £1 billion a year in sick pay. That will mean higher prices, fewer jobs, less growth. Will he drop these measures from the bill?
Prime Minister. No, Mr. Speaker. I think they're good for workers and good for growth. This is the same argument they made against the minimum wage and every protection for workers. And she says they're their ideas. Well, Mr. Speaker, she says she's in support of a third runway at Heathrow. Her Shadow Transport Secretary says that it would be calamitous. The Shadow Business Secretary is busy writing letters opposing airport expansion in his own backyard. Shadow Chief Secretary says the Oxford-Cambridge idea is flawed and he's against it. We're the coalition of builders, they're the coalition of blockers.
Mr. Speaker, he forgets his own Chancellor blocked an airport in her constituency. They are hypocrites, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about this employment bill. Part 1 of the bill means a new employee could start a job in the morning and take their employer to a tribunal that afternoon. It is no wonder that this bill has been called an adventure playground for lawyers. This bill is terrible for business, but it is great employment for lawyers. I know the Prime Minister loves the legal profession, but he needs to stop being a lawyer and start being a leader. This is another measure in the bill that fails his growth test. Will he show some leadership and drop it?
Mr. Speaker, I understand she likes straight talking. She's talking absolute nonsense. She knows, and anybody who understands anything about the bill or any employment law will know you can't start in the morning and go to the tribunal in the afternoon. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know she's not a lawyer. She's clearly not a leader. If she keeps on like this, she is going to be the next lettuce.
Mr. Speaker, he does not know what his bill is doing. He should listen to business who are terrified of this bill. The only workers he cares about are lawyers, but it is not just lawyers benefiting from this bill. Who else benefits? It's not taxpayers. They will be paying for even more welfare. It's not young workers. They won't get their first break. It's definitely not businesses. They are being hammered with yet more burdens. Who benefits, Mr. Speaker? Who benefits? It's the trade unions. It's the trade unions. Part 4 of the unemployment bill, Part 4, they haven't read it, Part 4 of the unemployment bill is the biggest expansion of trade union powers for a generation. Exactly. Thank you. The public will have heard them cheer. Rather than deregulating for business who create growth, he's deregulating for the unions. Clause 61 alone reduces the notice period for strikes to just 1 week. Given strikes are catastrophic for growth, will he drop Part 4 of the bill?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's good for working people and it's good for the economy. And she should keep up. The CBI have welcomed our positive steps this morning. Their quotes. The Chancellor's just given a brilliant speech on the economy, fixing the mess they left and growing our economy. CBI said they celebrate their positive leadership, a clear vision to kickstart our economy. That's the difference. We're growing the economy. They left it in a complete mess.
Can they bear it up?
Mr. Speaker, the arrogance of the Prime Minister is that he thinks that it's his government that creates growth. He's wrong. It is business that creates growth. Our economy is built by entrepreneurs, risk takers, and the hard graft of working people. They know that you can't tax your way to growth. You can't borrow your way to growth. You can't legislate your way to growth. Other countries are serious about freeing business from red tape. President Trump is doing it in America. Argentina is taking a chainsaw to regulations. Even the EU is not going as far as this left-wing government. This bill will put us at the bottom of the pack. Add it to the jobs tax, the family business tax. It's no wonder wealth creators are fleeing Britain in droves. The Chancellor is desperately trying to save her reputation. She knows Labour have damaged growth. This bill manifestly fails the Prime Minister's own growth test. If he won't drop the unemployment bill, what is the point of his growth tests?
She's got a nerve. They broke the economy, completely destroyed it. They broke the health service, completely destroyed it. They've ruined us on prisons and everything else you could mention. They failed on every front. They're in no position to give us lectures on anything. And she says that she accepts they failed. They're changing. They've learnt absolutely nothing.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's action last week to tackle rogue traders who installed faulty home insulation, affecting many of my Luton South and South Bedfordshire constituents. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Labour's Warm Homes plan will tackle fuel poverty and bring down bills for families as part of our plan for change?
Well, I thank her for that question. The party opposite have got a lot to answer for in the failing system that they've left behind. We've taken immediate action to ensure consumers insulating their homes are not let down again. We're investing £3.4 billion through our Warm Homes plan to upgrade 5 million homes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I take this opportunity to thank the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust for all their work in commemorating the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and say what a privilege it was to meet Holocaust survivors at their Guildhall event. When the honourable member, my honourable friend for North Devon, and I recently visited a hospital in Barnstaple, a surgeon there told us that it was like a ticking time bomb. He explained that a hospital that size needs 12 operating theatres to meet demand. They've got just 4. The last Conservative government promised to rebuild it, and we all know that was a hollow promise. Now, the North Devon District Hospital is one of 9 across the country where their urgent rebuild programme has now been postponed for over 10 years. So will the Prime Minister meet honourable members whose constituents' lives are being harmed by this delay to see if there's any way we can bring these urgent projects forward?
Well, can I join him in his comments about the Holocaust survivors that we met earlier this week? It was incredibly moving, as it always is, and I was struck by the fact that there were so many in the gathering that we were at, and we're unlikely to see so many in one place like that again, and we must never, ever forget. On the question of hospitals, look, I think people across the country are right to feel angry and betrayed and frustrated at the last government's non-plan on hospitals. It was unachievable, it was unfunded, it was empty promises. Under them, these hospitals would never have been built. Our funded plan, backed by the investment we've put in, will deliver them. We will take such steps as we can on hubs, etc., to advance quickly on waiting lists and operations, as he knows, and I'm more than happy to talk or to make sure that all constituents and members can meet relevant ministers.
David.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister told me that it was going to take 3 years before social care reforms could be implemented. Now he's saying that urgent hospital rebuilds are going to take more than a decade. My honourable friends and I will keep coming back to this issue. If I can turn to economic growth, the Chancellor has now admitted that we need to go further and faster in the pursuit of economic growth, and we agree. But the Prime Minister knows we believe that means setting aside his objections to a UK-EU customs union, so our country can go further and faster in rebuilding our trading relationships with our European neighbours, especially with the threat to world trade posed by Trump's tariffs and Trump's trade wars. But if he won't change his mind today on a customs union, when he goes to Brussels on Monday, will he confirm to the House that he will open negotiations for the UK to join the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention so we can start removing the growth-damaging trade barriers set up by the Conservatives?
Our number one mission is growth. That's why we've set out all the initiatives over the last 7 months, particularly the ones this morning. He knows, in relation to the reset with the EU, which we're determined to achieve, that we have clear red lines when it comes to the single market and the customs union. So he knows where we stand on that.
Debbie Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's Joseph Rowntree Foundation report on UK poverty not only highlights who is most likely to be poor, but also the scale and increase in deep and enduring poverty. I was encouraged by the Prime Minister's response to me before Christmas at the Liaison Committee, where he explained and acknowledged that disabled people experience poverty because of their extra costs, and that while over 2 million disabled people can and want to work, many others cannot and should receive adequate support. Many vulnerable claimants are worried following speculation that the £3 billion of savings to be found in the Social Security budget may impact on their disability benefits. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that language matters and that their concerns must be heard?
Yeah. Well, I thank you for raising this, and I know it's an issue that she's deeply concerned about and campaigns on. The rise in poverty, Mr. Speaker, caused by the mismanagement of the economy by the party opposite is unacceptable. Our approach to social security will ensure that work is accessible to as many people as possible as a route out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, that includes the new Connect to Work programme, expected to help 100,000 disabled people find and stay in work.
Gavin Robinson.
Speaker, may I firstly thank the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for their sterling support over the last number of days for Northern Ireland in the aftermath of Storm AO, and it's greatly appreciated and demonstrates how well the Union works. Mr. Speaker, on the 15th of August 1998, the fragility of peace in Northern Ireland was shattered when the real IRA detonated a bomb in Omagh town. 29 people died, and a further 2 unborn twins never saw this world. Through the dignity and the stoic campaigning of Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan died, a public inquiry was secured through the courts, who recommended in 2021 that the Irish government should similarly hold an inquiry to understand what could have been prevented, given the cross-border nature of this atrocity. The bomb was prepared in the Irish Republic and transported from the Irish Republic. Will he use his good offices to ensure that truth is delivered and justice arrives for the families of those who so needlessly lost their lives from Irish Republican terrorism.
First, on the question of the storm, can I assure him that we will continue to work with the leaders in Northern Ireland to ensure that we deal with what was really devastating in Northern Ireland for very many people still without power and all the associated problems that are associated with that. In relation to the Omagh bombing inquiry, I thank him for raising this. It was a heinous and cowardly terrorist attack, and it shocked the world. Our thoughts are with the family members now taking part in commemorative hearings this week. I do welcome the Irish Government's commitment to cooperate with the inquiry. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has raised with the Irish Government the importance of working together on addressing these and all legacy issues, and I'm grateful for him for raising this very serious and important issue.
Jack Cabot.
Mr Speaker, the Ipswich Northern Bypass is a project of local, regional and national importance, one on which the future of our town and county hinges. But this critical project has been gathering dust for years, repeatedly blocked by people who refuse to act in our long-term interests. The Prime Minister has set out how our government will back the builders over the blockers. Will he now back the builders in my town and make this a project of national significance through our plan for change?
Well, he's been relentless in seeking to boost growth and investment in Ipswich and Suffolk, and the gridlock his constituents face underlines the failure of the party opposite to deal with this when they had the chance to do so. Mr Speaker, we will fast-track decisions on at least 150 major economic infrastructure projects to kick-start growth, and I will make sure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the issues of concern to him.
In room.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As my right honourable friend said earlier, last week North Devon District Hospital got the devastating news that investment would be delayed 10 years beyond 2035. In the 5 years since the last government's empty promises, our hospital's maintenance backlog has grown to over £40 million. Given that £200 million has reportedly been spent just on consultancy fees for the new hospital programme, what funding for extra maintenance will be available for those hospitals that now face another decade of waiting?
I thank him for raising this, and his constituents will be angry and frustrated at the empty, unfunded promises left by the Conservatives. Let's be clear, under their non-plan, North Devon District Hospital would simply not have been delivered. It's not been delayed, it was never going to be delivered, and they know it, he knows it, his constituents know it. We have put in place a funded, deliverable plan that will see the hospital built, and will work closely with the Trust to accelerate work. And the party opposite really owe his constituents an apology.
Deirdre Cosson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Children in Ealing Southall will be sleeping on sofas and on living room floors tonight due to 14 years of failure from the Conservatives. Ealing Council has joined over 100 councils trying to remove the barriers to give these kids a decent home to live in, something the party opposite don't seem to care about. As part of the government's plan for change, will the Prime Minister look at the 5 solutions put forward by these councils so we can secure the future of council housing for those children sleeping on the floor tonight?
Well, she's right to raise this very serious issue. We are committed to working with every council to deliver the biggest increase in social and affordable housing in a generation. We're immediately taking action to reform the right to buy, to enable councils to borrow more cheaply, and investing in affordable homes programme.
Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I entered politics, active politics, after an attack in my home was misused by others to promote their anti-EU, anti-immigrant agenda. My life was saved by 2 brave police officers from Wimbledon Police Station. As a family, our lives were transformed by a restorative justice session organised by the charity Why Me, where we met one of my 4 attackers in prison. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how his government can give restorative justice greater emphasis and put victims at the centre of the criminal justice system, reduce recidivism and cut crime and costs?
Can I send my sympathy for what the honourable member experienced. It must have had a profound impact on him and, of course, on his family. I too have seen the power of restorative justice, which does enable victims to receive answers, and perpetrators have to face the human cost of their crimes. Under the Victims Code, all adult victims must be told about restorative justice and how to access it. We can always do more, and I'll ensure that he gets the meeting that he wants with the relevant minister.
Charters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to announce that this summer I'll be going on paternity leave again for baby number 2. And may I congratulate the Secretary of State for Scotland on his new arrival. The Chancellor spoke brilliantly this morning on growth, and I'm pleased to reveal that new JRF research shows that by increasing paternity leave, we could increase economic growth by £2.6 billion a year. So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he review statutory paternity leave? And from one father to another, will he meet with me and the dad shift to support and discuss how we can support new parents?
Well, can I wish him and his wife all well with their new arrival? We are conducting a review into parental leave because you can't grow the economy if parents have to choose between work and their children. And thanks to the Employment Rights Bill, which they oppose opposite, 30,000 more fathers will get paternity leave. And that's the difference, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition wants to roll back parental rights. We're extending them.
Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2012, the Drax power station has been given £7 billion of green subsidies by the government for burning 27 million trees per year. That's enough money for 5 years of pensioners' winter fuel payments. While Ofgem has been asleep at the wheel, a recent KPMG report has concluded that Drax claimed those subsidies illegally. Will the Prime Minister today demand to see that KPMG report before giving another £1 of taxpayers' money to Drax?
Thank you for raising this. It is an important issue. Of course, we will look at the report, but I don't join in her description. We will look at the report.
Back day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you well know, Lancashire is a wonderful county full of great businesses and hard-working people. But for too long, we've been held back by an outdated two-tier council system. The government's English devolution bill is a massive opportunity for us to get back in the fast lane and catch up with the likes of Manchester and Liverpool. So will the Prime Minister join with me in calling on all Lancashire leaders to work together in the interests of our residents, putting aside political differences and self-interests, and move forward in good faith to unleash Lancashire's huge potential?
Well, he, of course, has given decades of service to his community, Mr. Speaker. I'm a firm believer in moving power out of Westminster into the hands of those with skin in the game. That's how you boost growth, create opportunities and drive reform. I'm pleased that we're establishing a combined county authority in Lancashire. Our ambition is for mayors across all areas of England who can take advantage of the powers set out in the devolution white paper, including in Lancashire.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I declare my interest as the Governor of the Royal Berkshire Hospital and a family member has shares in the medical company. In the gallery today are patients who use the Royal Berkshire Hospital. Parts of its estate are crumbling as we speak, and it urgently needs a rebuild, but we're going to have to wait until at least 2037. Can the Prime Minister please explain to these visitors and the House why he thinks that it is acceptable that staff and patients dodge buckets collecting rainwater from leaking roofs for another 18 years? And will he meet with them and explain it to them face to face?
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this on behalf of his constituents. So I speak, obviously, to them, and his constituents will hear the answer. There wasn't a plan for this building. It was a pretend plan. It was a fiction. It was unfunded and it was undeliverable. It only existed in the head of Boris Johnson. And they're the frustration for his constituents, and I really understand it. They thought, because they were promised, that they were going to get something which the party opposite knew was never going to be delivered. That is absolutely unforgivable. We will pick that up. We've put in place a funded scheme to build as quickly as we can, but it's got to be funded. It's got to be deliverable. That's the difference between the approach that we're taking and the approach that they took. And of course, I'll make sure a relevant minister meets with him and his constituents in order to explain that more fully to them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In China, DeepSeek has developed an AI model almost as good as the most advanced technology from OpenAI. In the US, they're investing up to $500 billion in building out data centres. Now, to build data centres, you need two things: lots of energy and ideally cold weather. Fortunately, Scotland has both of those in abundance. So will the Prime Minister back Glasgow being an AI growth zone to help bring investment and solidify the UK's place as the third largest AI market on earth?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. What a contrast, the SNP, a strong Labour voice championing economic growth in Scotland. The AI developments this week show why we're right to put artificial intelligence at the heart of our plan for change. We've already secured £39 billion of AI investment, which will create 13,000 jobs across the UK. I agree with him that Scotland has real potential for AI growth zones. I'll make sure that he gets to meet with a relevant minister to discuss.
John Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Horsham, my local council faces a £500,000 tax bill from the rise in national insurance, and my local hospice, St Catherine's, has had to mothball a brand new ward. What message does the Prime Minister have for all the public services that are outright losers at the hands of the very tax that's supposed to save them?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising this. As he knows, the settlement to local councils was an increase this year, so they have more money to deal with the problems they face. They were underfunded, broken by the last government. We've now put that support and that funding in place. That's the right thing to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was such great news when the government decided that it was right to pay compensation to the LGBT veterans who'd unfairly lost their jobs. But unfortunately, they're not alone. There are others who've been prepared to lay down their lives on behalf of the country who have also been treated disgracefully. I include in that list my constituent who was sacked from MI6 simply for being gay. Would my right honourable friend please commit to righting that wrong and for meeting my constituent?
Well, I'm grateful to her raising this really important issue. All those who serve our country deserve our fullest respect and gratitude. Mr. Speaker, that's why we're righting the historic wrongs inflicted on LGBT veterans, already significantly increasing compensation available and enabling them to get their ranks restored. I know the issue she's raised is a real issue to the Foreign Secretary. He's looking at it, and I'll make sure she gets to talk to him about it, but we do need to deal with this historic injustice. She's right about that.
Jim Allister.
Thank you. Given the strategic commitment to Irish unity in the programme for government of the new government in Dublin, can I ask the Prime Minister whether he and his government have a strategic and economic interest in retaining Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom? And if they do, why then is he continuing with a system whereby, in over 300 areas of law in the economic sphere, Northern Ireland is subject not to UK law, but to the same laws that apply in the Irish Republic, laws we don't make and can't change?
Mr. Speaker, we're proud of and totally committed to the Good Friday Agreement. And Northern Ireland matters to this government. It matters to me. He will know I worked there for 5 years with the police service in Northern Ireland. I want to see Northern Ireland secure, safe for all communities and thriving in the future. And I believe that it can be. We'll be doing everything to make sure that it does.
Elvin Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow marks the 20th anniversary of the loss of Royal Air Force aircraft X-Ray Victor 179 and the 10 UK service personnel that were killed on board. Known to their friends as Steady, Smudge, Gary Nick, Pards, Gibbo, Richie, Bob, Dave, Jonesy and Paddy. These people were killed on a routine flight between Baghdad and Balad as a result of a poorly protected aircraft. This was the largest single loss of life in the Iraq War. Would the Prime Minister join with me to thank and recognise our service personnel for their service and their sacrifice, and the stoicism of their family as we join to commemorate such a tragic moment.
Well, I thank him for reminding the House of this case, and I know that condolences of the whole House remain with the families of these brave soldiers. We will never forget the vital role they played to support the coalition operation in Iraq. Can I thank him and pay tribute to his service? We are immensely proud of our armed forces and their courage and dedication as they keep our country safe.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister may know that this time last week, representatives of those who've been injured seriously by COVID vaccines were giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, including my constituent Kate Scott. I hope he also knows that the compensation available to those people isn't adequate and isn't adequately accessible. I'm grateful to the Health Secretary for the thought I know he is giving to how that position may be remedied. But can I ask the Prime Minister to give his personal support to that objective? Not just because it's the right thing to do for the people affected, but also because it will support the objective we should all share to maintain public confidence in vaccination.
Well, thank you for raising this, and as he says, the Health Secretary is looking at it, and I can assure him I will also look at it with the Health Secretary, and we will get back to him as we do so.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, I heard a story from an elderly resident in Bedworth. Colin Basra phoned the GP surgery to make an appointment for his elderly wife and was told no appointments would be available for 3 months. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this is utterly shocking and horrifying and is a direct result of 14 years of neglect by the party opposite?
Well, I thank her for raising it. She's right to raise it. She's absolutely right. The damage they did to the NHS was absolutely unforgivable. We are taking steps to make sure more GP appointments will be available. We're getting the waiting list down. We're putting the investment in the NHS. As with everything else, we're clearing up the mess that they left behind.
Final question, Andrew Rosender.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister should know that my constituents in Romford are shocked, angry and dismayed by the suggestion by the ONS that the population of this country will rise to 72.5 million by 2032. Mr. Speaker, that's 500,000 people a year, which is unsustainable. Who voted for that? And will the government do something to ensure that the population of this country is sustainable going forward? Because there is no mandate for such a colossal increase in immigration in this country.
I think he should talk to his leader. Because net migration went through the roof under the last government, nearly 1 million, quadrupled. And who was cheering it on? Who was cheering it on? The leader of the opposition. His constituents are right to be concerned about the loss of control by the last government. We're taking control. We will bring these numbers down. But the record is absolutely clear, and it sits right there.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
Yes, that does bring us to the end of this week's session of Prime Minister's Questions, as you heard there from Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. Joining us for this part of Politics Live for the Government, Nick Thomas-Symonds, Cabinet Office Minister; for the Opposition, for the Conservatives, Gareth Davis, Shadow Treasury Minister; and Nick Watt, Newsnight's Political Editor. Welcome to all of you. Well, you have heard, obviously, in the first part of the programme, us discussing at length the big speech from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, on growth. Well, in PMQs, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, took that head on and accused Keir Starmer and the government of pinching Conservative ideas to get growth. She said you can't borrow your way to growth, you can't legislate your way to growth, and then focused her eye on the Employment Rights Bill that the government is bringing in, saying that that actually is going to increase regulation and is not welcomed by business. What did you make of it all?
Well, when the Chancellor of the Exchequer stands up around an hour before Prime Minister's questions and it's billed as a landmark speech about a new energised direction on growth, the Leader of the Opposition is not going to say they're against growth. They're going to say they're pro-growth. And indeed, Kemi Badenoch said, as you said, these are our ideas. The Oxford to Cambridge corridor, the third runway at Heathrow, the spades in the ground are our ideas, to which Labour then says, well, they're your ideas, but they didn't come into effect. But the second thing you've got to do, because you're the opposition, is you've got to say that the government is taking overall the wrong approach, not on the spades on the ground, but in terms of what they're doing to change the law. And that's why Kemi Badenoch was talking about the employment bill, which is to increase workers' rights, and she's not calling it the employment bill, she is calling it the unemployment bill, because what Kemi Badenoch is saying is that that is going to put a greater burden on businesses and that will not help growth. And obviously, in addition to that, Conservatives have been talking very strongly about the national insurance increase on employers, which they're saying we can already see Sainsbury's losing jobs is having a detrimental impact on growth, they would say.
Right. I mean, the Chancellor says that the real test, Nick Thomas-Symonds, of this government's success will be if people start to feel better off. Yes, these long-term programmes are one thing, third runway at Heathrow, this Oxford-Cambridge corridor. When do you expect that to happen?
Well, the test for us is obviously in this Parliament. We have been elected with a 5-year mandate. That is how our electoral system works. We have that mandate from July. But what I think you are seeing now is a government that is driving forward projects, driving forward a plan for growth that has simply for too long been put in the too difficult box. I mean, you talk about the last Conservative government. I mean, there was a vote on Heathrow in Parliament in 2009 before the Conservatives even came to power. That is an idea that's been around for over 20 years. The time has come to really put our foot on the accelerator and move forward with these projects.
Right,
and that will mean, of course, difficult decisions going forward. It will mean, as the Prime Minister has said, signing with builders, not blockers.
Well, let's see.
We'll
judge you on delivery and whether you can get these projects off the ground in the way, as you say, the last Conservative government failed to do so. But the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, echoing what Rachel Reeves had talked about, says people will feel a difference this year. How? In what way?
Well, we've already seen some of the independent assessments of the economy. You've seen both the IMF and the OECD saying that by next year we will have the fastest growing G7 economy in Europe. We've already seen that. We've seen today, for example, a PwC survey of CEOs saying that Britain is the second most popular place in the world and most attractive place to invest. So we're already seeing this. We saw, for example, in the autumn last year, the government held an investment summit, attracted £63 billion of investment. So we had to fix the foundations. Now we are driving forward with this growth agenda.
But it's interesting that the Business Secretary committing himself and the government to an increase in living standards, because this from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the independent think tank, they tweeted this after the budget at the end of October. The last Parliament, so Conservatives, including a pandemic and a cost of living crisis, saw per capita disposable household income rise by just 0.3% per year. The lowest, in fact, rise in living standards. But the forecast for the current Parliament, under a Labour government, suggests that it will be the second worst on record for household incomes. Should the Business Secretary have guaranteed that there will be a rise in living standards this year?
I think the Business Secretary was entirely right to put forward that optimism. I mean, you're entirely right on the last Parliament being just quite an appalling Parliament.
But not on this
record.
one.
What we are now going to see are our growth plans being put in place and driven forward, bringing benefits right across the country. So absolutely, I am optimistic, as is the Business Secretary, that our best days lie ahead.
And what was your reaction to the speech? On the basis of your past economic record, which we've sort of partially set out, you must have welcomed it.
Well, look, before we do that, I think it's important to say this is hastily arranged. Why is she announcing a big set of announcements, which I'll come on to, I promise. Now, it's because growth has completely tanked in the last 6 months that they've been in power. The budget was assessed by the OBR to be anti-growth. In fact, they downgraded growth because of the anti-growth tax measures. And the point here, I think, for your viewers is that, yes, absolutely, we want to see deregulation. Deregulation is pro-growth, but that is completely watered down and overshadowed by anti-growth taxation. Taxation that nobody voted for, we were told it wouldn't happen, and that is causing businesses across this country to have to either freeze hiring or cut jobs, and that is anti-growth.
Nick?
If we hadn't taken the action we did with the appalling inheritance, that cost of inaction would
the £25 billion worth of tax rises on employers
would have been far greater. The cost of inaction was far greater. And secondly, that money will go towards our National Health Service and alongside reform, and that is having a healthier
It's going to pay the train drivers a 14% pay rise while you're taking money from the winter fuel payments. You're taking hard-earned cash away from enterprising risk takers who employ people up and down the country. You're reducing business rates from 70% to 40%. You're slapping them with national insurance contribution tax rises, which they did not vote for. You told the public you would not do it, and you did it anyway. These are anti-growth measures, no matter what Rachel Reeves said today, and we do welcome many of the measures, and I'll come on to that.
Are you in favour of the Heathrow third runway, Gareth?
Come on to that. But you can't, I know you're trying to move on from these tax rises, but businesses in your constituency and mine will tell us consistently that this is putting up their cost of doing business. They cannot hire people, and in some cases, very sad cases, they're having to cut jobs. Unemployment is up, inflation is up.
And then I want to hear which proposals you are backing.
We've been creating jobs, actually, since the election. That's what our National Wealth Fund has been doing.
So why is it up?
But I would say to Gareth, only a couple of weeks ago, the Leader of the Opposition apologised for the fact that last Conservative government had gone ahead with Brexit without a plan for growth. That's what Gareth's own leader is saying. I'm not sure he's got the memo about being apologetic about the last government record, but to try to then shift blame to this government when we had to fill that black hole in the public finances, and Gareth knows if that hadn't been done, we'd have been putting the whole stability of the economy.
Well, let me ask, Gareth, if you'd like to sort of apologise or admit mistakes when it comes to your economic record. As I say again, you presided over the Conservatives' the lowest rise in living standards on record. Do you want to apologise and say that was a very big mistake?
I think, look, the last Parliament that Nick talks about and you're talking about was one of the most difficult periods of time this country has ever faced. We faced a once-in-a-century pandemic where we essentially had to shut down the economy. Then we had the invasion of Ukraine, which pushed up wholesale gas prices. Now, at the time, we went in with £400 billion of support for businesses and families during the pandemic and £100 billion of support for energy bills, essentially paying 50% of energy bills. All the while, the Labour Party was saying, more. You need to throw more money at this
We did not encourage Liz Truss in any way. The Liz Truss disaster.
This is a serious programme. We are trying to deal with people's incomes and their lives. And what I'm saying
had serious consequences for people's mortgages, Gareth. Nobody is underplaying that. Huge.
So how do you explain the recent bond market turmoil, which pushed up prices? I'm sorry, let's deal with facts.
Yeah, but is it comparable to what happened under Liz Truss,
I think we have to move forward and deal with. We lost the election.
Yeah.
We took responsibility. It is time. Frankly, I keep coming on these shows and Labour politician after Labour politician try and blame everybody else for the tax rises that they're putting on businesses. They're pushing the blame onto anybody else.
No, the last
It is time.
Well, all right. Well, let's talk about the Employment Rights Bill. Kemi Badenoch is right, isn't she, that bill fails your test on growth?
No, she isn't right at all. I mean, this is just a very traditional Conservative argument. They used it about the national minimum wage. Whenever you have Labour governments that are enhancing rights of work, the Conservatives always have this same argument.
But Keir Starmer was talking about deregulation on the front page of the Times. He was channeling Margaret Thatcher, the era of deregulation in the 1980s. And then you've got this Employment Rights Bill that, well, I don't know who is actually backing it on the business. Can you name a business, by the way, that is backing it?
I have conversations with businesses all the time about the Employment Rights Bill. I'm not going to stop naming just businesses on your programme that I've had conversations with. But what I am going to say to you, Joe, is this, that first of all, having a secure, healthy workforce makes a productive.
But you can't name a major business. You can't name a major business that is backing this very comprehensive plan on workers' rights.
I don't accept this division between workers' rights on the one hand, employers on the other. Actually, having that secure workforce is in everybody's interest to have a productive workforce.
And the CBI, Rupert Soames, they're not wildly keen about it. But interestingly, Keir Starmer did make quite an interesting point on this. So in his article in The Times, he sort of channeled Margaret Thatcher, but he also channeled Tony Blair. And an interesting argument he made on this bill in answer to Kemi Badenoch was that you, the Conservative Party, opposed the minimum wage. When that was done by the Blair government, you said it would be anti-growth, and now the minimum wage is accepted. And what will be interesting about this employment bill and these workers' rights is, will they be seen to hold back growth, or will it be like the minimum wage? Doesn't seem to be a good idea, but then becomes the overall consensus.
Right, when it comes to growth, which are the proposals you welcome, Gareth?
So, of the announcements today, I think, there are a number which we would support, absolutely. And this is because a number of them started the work in our time, right? Whether it's Old Trafford, where we launched the review of this, which published in March 2024, whether it's the Moderna investment, which I think goes back to 2023. This is just like the investment summit, by the way, which Nick was talking about. 63 billion they talk about, but actually half of it was already announced, including
But if they deliver, but do you agree if they deliver, and it is a big if, because we've already heard from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan is going to go through the courts if he has to stop the third runway approval at Heathrow. If they succeed, they will have succeeded where you failed to deliver on projects that you would have liked to have seen come to fruition.
Well, there are a number of areas where, we need to build and grow our economy through infrastructure. And I think we should have a bit more cross-party consensus and acknowledgement of when projects started. That would be a nice start. But I think, look, I'm fiercely agreeing with you that we need more deregulation. We do need to build infrastructure. And the way, we set up the UK Infrastructure Bank to do just that.
Right.
So it's not that we didn't do anything. We built 2.5 million new homes. We didn't do nothing on this. We did quite a lot. Rachel Reeves is introducing new measures today, some of which we support, but this is in a context of a series of anti-growth tax rises which are going to hurt growth significantly on top of the Employment Rights Bill, which is essentially an unemployment bill because it adds regulation to businesses, not takes it away.
Well, on the issue of unemployment, to use Kemi Badenoch and your phrase, let me show you this headline in BBC News. Cardiff University plans to cut 400 jobs and axe courses. It's come as a huge surprise to staff at Cardiff University and shock. How does that fit with your growth plan?
Well, look, in terms of Cardiff University, I've only just seen that news this morning. Clearly, there are challenges in our university sector regarding funding. But could I just come back to Gareth for a moment? Because I don't think he's answered my question on Heathrow. I mean, he talks about a cross-party consensus. Are we going to have one? Are we going to have the Leader of the Opposition support for the third runway at Heathrow? I really hope so. I genuinely hope so, because I think on these longer-term infrastructure projects we've had in the past, that would be very welcome. Right.
Well, he's got, obviously, your support, I presume, on everything
Well, look,
you've said.
Kemi Badenoch has set out. She has voted for it in the past. She would be provisionally supportive, and we're provisionally supportive, if certain conditions can be met, if criteria can be met where it's done, in terms of value for money, not disruptive to communities, and does it in a way that actually does grow the economy. Right. By the way, he mentions our support for it, whether it exists or not. Rachel Reeves actually opposed the expansion of Leeds Bradford Airport. I'm pretty sure Keir Starmer may have voted against this in the past.
Rachel Reeves did oppose, indeed, that expansion of her local airport, and Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is still opposing expansion at Heathrow. Let's have a listen.
This government's commitment to getting growth in London and across the country, I'm against new runway at Heathrow.
Will you support legal action, as you did last time, to stop a third runway?
Let's wait and see what proposals are from Heathrow, but if they don't meet the objectives I've set out, I won't hesitate in working on a cross-party basis, working with communities, working with councils to challenge Heathrow Airport.
Right, what do you say to your own Labour Mayor of London?
Well, look, I think we have devolution in this country, and for whether it's the mayors, whether it's the First Ministers, the devolved administrations, they're all entitled to have their view. But the government position is that we are in favour of a third runway at Heathrow. We are confident as well that we will be able to meet issues in terms of noise, but also our legally binding climate targets. It is the UK's only hub airport. It is the airport through which 3/4 of our long-distance, long-haul travel
Sadiq Khan
goes.
You're going to have to fight, to use Rachel Reeves's words, over this.
But it is also the place where 60% of our freight goes through. So it is hugely strategically important for the United Kingdom, and that expansion, in my view, is in the interest of our country.
Let's talk about something that was raised actually by Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, and that is negotiations on Brexit. Nick Thomas Simmons is in charge of those, or heading up those negotiations with the Prime Minister, and Keir Starmer has a meeting, an important meeting, next week. Fill us in.
Well, I'm in the presence of great EU minds. I hear you've been chairing high-level discussions, and Nick is obviously the government's point man.
Let's not overstate it.
I don't want to put words into Nick's mouth, but he'll be talking about the 3 pillars that are the framework of his negotiations with the EU: security, cooperation on defence and foreign policy, safety of citizens, that's greater cooperation on law enforcement, and growth and trade, that's a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, and mutual recognition of qualifications. What does that mean? Well, let me report a conversation I had a couple of years ago with some people who are very plugged into the Keir Starmer government and very plugged into the EU and UK-EU relations. And what these people said to me is that when Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, they thought that would happen, it should just be completely normal for Keir Starmer to go to meetings of the European Council. What's happening next week? Keir Starmer is going to a meeting of the European Council focused on defence, which is Nick's first pillar. What these people also said to me is, what do we want to get from the overall agreement with the EU? And what they said is basically what we want is Theresa May's deal, but we won't call it Theresa May's deal. Now, what do you mean by Theresa May's deal? What you mean by that is getting as close to the economic architecture of the EU without actually becoming part of the economic architecture. It means something that's not a million miles away from a customs union that's not called a customs union. On the single market, it's something like dynamic alignment. You follow EU rules, but you don't call it dynamic alignment. That was the aspiration of people who are not a million miles away from the Keir Starmer government.
Is that what you're pursuing?
No. No.
Why not?
I wouldn't say that.
Why not?
Accurate. I think to the first part of Nick's answer, the talks that will shortly go into a more intense phase, because we will have the first UK-EU summit that will be held in the first half of this year, will be in the 3 areas that Nick has set out, around foreign policy and defence, structured cooperation, around safety of our citizens, making sure there's no place on our continent for criminals to hide. And thirdly, on tearing down trade barriers. But we set out in our manifesto our red lines.
Right.
We will not rejoin the customs union. We will not rejoin the single market.
And no freedom of
movement. We will not go back to freedom of movement. That is the framework in which these.
So you won't get anything. So well, what's the point of these negotiations? I mean, The Independent has here Starmer warned over anemic post-Brexit reset efforts in damning report. If you won't move on those red lines, what will you get in terms of smoother trade and a reduction in barriers from the EU?
Let me just give you 3 examples. We will seek to negotiate a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement so that we can have agri-food products, agricultural products. We can put food on people's tables more cheaply. Services, mutual recognition of professional qualifications, or indeed for our cultural sector to make it easy for our touring artists around Europe. There's just 3 practical examples in our manifesto.
What about a youth mobility scheme?
Look, we don't have plans for a youth mobility scheme. Our priorities are what is set out, the examples that are in our manifesto. That is the position we take. Those are our priorities in negotiations. And by the way, we've been having significant discussions with the European Union. We'll see the Prime Minister attending the European Council as well on Monday. And these are things, this is not a zero-sum game. These are things that are in the mutual interest of both the UK and the EU to make our citizens more prosperous.
So you're closed off to that idea of a youth mobility scheme? That's off the table?
We have a red line on freedom of movement. I've repeated that throughout the negotiations.
How is that freedom of movement, a youth mobility scheme? They don't get to stay here forever. You don't get citizenship. How is it freedom of movement?
Well, in terms of what you're suggesting there, we've not got as yet to this more intense period of the negotiations. I hear lots of rumours and things written about what the EU wants or doesn't want, but we will see that in due course. But our priorities are what we set out in our manifesto, and it will be within that framework.
Right. Do you accept, Gareth, that your deal does need to be improved?
Well, first of all, before Keir Starmer jets off and hangs out with all the EU leaders and Nick spending a lot of time...
Are you jealous?
in the EU. He talks about putting more food on people's dinner tables. One way he could do that is by cancelling the disastrous family farm tax, which is decimating our
I thought you were going to say cancelling the disastrous Conservative deal.
No, I mean, look, this is really serious in rural areas. Farmers are really being hit by this family farm tax. And
but on
farmland's
the
been taken
Brexit
up
deal,
by solar farms that Ed Miliband is approving. So I would suggest that Keir and Nick need to spend a bit more time in this country talking to farmers, talking to people in my constituency, for example, who are dismayed by this focus on the EU at a time when the domestic policies of this government are really hurting people and our economy. That's what they care about. That's what they want this government to be focused on, and they're not.
Right. What was your response then to Kemi Badenoch saying that we made a mistake when we didn't have a plan for growth post-Brexit?
So what she was saying is that we need to optimise, we need to find better opportunities, more opportunities, having an honest conversation with the British public about the opportunities presented by Brexit. I completely agree with her. We do need to go further in capturing those opportunities. And I would support Nick in finding ways that doesn't tie us to the EU, but improves our economy.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much to all of my guests for this part of Politics Live. I'll be back with more tomorrow at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer. From all of us here, good afternoon.